All right. Good morning, gamers. This is Aaron from ACM Cyber at UC San Diego. This is a walkthrough of the educational challenge Apollo 1337 for SDCTF 2022. However, this challenge is originally from SDCTF 2021. That's why it's on the repo for that, which is public. But these educational challenges are designed for you to just follow along with me, have fun, and get familiar with the tools and techniques of each category. These educational challenges are not worth points, so if you are big leagues, essentially, you don't need to waste your time on them. But for those beginner teams that do complete all of our educational challenges, you will receive a very small, very special prize to commemorate your learning. So, anyways, let's jump into it and maybe you'll learn something. This is from last year. Again, this is the original prompt. Hey there, intern. We have a rocket launch scheduled for noon today, and the launch interface is down. You will need to directly use the API to launch the rocket. No, we don't have any documentation, and quickly, our shareholders are watching. So you'll just go ahead and click this link and it should connect you to the site, but also some information here. You've got the original specification of how this challenge is supposed to be solved, the original flag, and this will be the flag that gets spit out by the demo that I'm about to do, but you won't be able to copy this flag and use this flag. You'll have to actually solve the challenge and you'll get a different flag, and that'll be what you turn in for points. So keep that in mind, that this is not the flag that you need to turn in to get credit for this challenge. Sorry, I accidentally clicked on one of the write-ups. And then the last one, last section here is a bunch of write-ups. So if my explanation is poor, you can always use one of these other write-ups as well to learn more about the challenge and how other people solved it, of which there were 55 teams that solved this challenge. So let's go ahead and go to this URL. My URL is a little different because I'm running it in the dev environment. And let me just refresh the page. You'll notice that, yeah, well, sure enough, when we load it up, it says that the front end is not working, which is not very common. It's usually just a static thing. So it's uncommon for this to break. And then the back end status is apparently healthy and that all the routes are functioning normally. So if you're familiar with web dev, there's a front end and a back end usually. The back end provides an API by which the front end connects back to in order to interact with the web service. So I'm not going to go super in depth into all the ideas behind it. I'm going to kind of just show you how you would solve it, but fortunately you'll be able to pause and go back and follow along as I do it, so that maybe you'll learn to, if there's something you don't understand, you can Google it, etc. You get the idea. So first step here for me personally would be recon. Just looking at it and seeing what I notice. The first thing I notice is when I load the page, backend status originally says fetching and then changes to healthy, indicating to me that there might be some kind of request that gets sent that then responds with the status. And available to me right here in the browser, which by the way, I'm using Firefox, but you can use any browser and you'll have access to the same tooling. I have access to a view page source and inspect element. I mean, if I view page source, it's all on one line because it's minified, web source code. It's not very fun to read. So I will want to use the more robust inspect element to be able to look at the source code, and you can kind of browse the HTML directly. You can see the scripts that are being loaded. I happen to notice that there's a lot of this next stuff. This div is called next. There's some scripts being loaded from some library called next. And I happen to know that that is a web framework that usually uses React, but if you're not familiar, it's just it's a front end, back end, full stack kind of web framework for JavaScript web page development. I think Hulu uses it and a few other big ones, but just going through the actual HTML here, I don't see much that's interesting. Like literally, I've just expanded the whole thing. So there might be some interesting stuff in these scripts. However, they're not going to be the easiest to parse either. I mean, let's see if I can just open this in a new tab. This isn't particularly thrilling to read. It's again one of those things where you're going to want to use the tooling to format this for you, because otherwise you're going to probably go insane. It's all just minified, so That's not quite how you're supposed to browse it. Since I don't really have a good idea of what I'm looking for yet, let's go to the networking tab, because I did mention that there appeared to be a network request being made earlier. I'm going to hit reload, and it's going to load all of the requests that came in. And most of these are scripts, which I already saw in the actual DOM here, right there. And then I do notice this JSON request that's being sent back to this endpoint here. It's slash API slash status, and then there's a verbose query parameter, which isn't set to anything. When I click that, I can inspect kind of what's going on. I can see that, I'm sending this request and I'm getting back this response in JSON. This is the raw version of it. So with some information that isn't very useful. It's basically the information that's printed here. But I can kind of see that this is probably why when I load the page, it says fetching. And then once this request returns, it says, yep, the backend's healthy, all right. So when I go back here, the main point of interest with this request is the verbose parameter. This is a piece of user input, and I'd like to modify it to see what it does. And I can actually do this in Firefox. You have a limited set of functionalities available in Firefox to resend custom requests. So I'm going to kind of demonstrate that. So if you don't have like a super crazy web hacking tool like Burp Suite or something, even just from your browser without leaving it, you can do a little bit of hacking and kind of, I guess the recon work is probably easiest in the browser. I can set this query string to whatever I want. I can set it to true. I can set it to false. I can set it to 5. I'm going to try setting it to true and see if it's like a Boolean. If I go ahead and hit send, it creates a new request here that I'm going to click on. And we see that from this response, we get more information. Since this is a GET request, I could have also just opened this in a new tab and set this directly. I could set this to like 256 or something. And you'll notice that verbose just needs to be something, and it will return this additional information. So for post requests, you're going to want to probably use this network tab to do it instead, since you can't just modify the URL like you can with a GET request, or even use a more robust tool like Burp Suite, or even just a web development tool, not necessarily a hacking suite, like Postman is one tool that can be used to send custom HTTP requests. And I'm actually going to demonstrate that now, because what we got back from this was a bunch of additional routes. We've got the status route, which we're on, and then a rocket launch and fuel route. So I'm going to go ahead and try, rather than keep messing around with this edit and resend technology, which isn't very powerful. I can do it, but it's not very easy to use here. This wasn't its main priority of this functionality, was not to send different requests. So I'm gonna switch over to Postman, since it's not freemium like well, actually it is freemium like Burp Suite, but it has a little bit more for just sending requests, and I think a lot of developers who aren't necessarily in cybersecurity might already have it installed. So let me pull open Postman here. I've got it. Let me actually copy this URL real fast, and then I've got Postman. As you can see, it has a whole bunch of abstraction, but really I'm just interested in creating a request. So I'm going to press that, type in my URL, hit send, and we should get back the response that I had in my browser there, status, rocket launch, etc. So let's go ahead and create a new request. Let's leave this one alone because we might want it later. And instead of it being /status, let's try one of these other ones. So /rocket launch, for example. Let's try that one. So we're just going to we're going to leave the /API, and we're going to do rocket launch. And it's in my history for reasons. If I hit send, and it tells me some new information about my request, right? You need to send a request body, firstly, and also it must be JSON. The way that you do that in Postman is you have to go to body here. So rather than sending data through the query parameters, you want to go to the body. And in order to send JSON, you have to do raw and then set the type to JSON. And then from here, you can type your literal JSON. So I could just send like an empty array, a number, or most commonly you'll send an object, and usually it'll have some stuff in it. But let's just start with a basic object. If I hit send, you're going to get a weird complaint probably. This actually isn't the web app. This is I think the GCP load balancer I happen to be using. It just says your client has issued a malformed or illegal request. Don't worry, you're not going to get arrested. What it means by that is you tried to send a request body even though you're using a get method of sending a request, which doesn't allow request bodies, but post does. So we'll just switch over to post and try again, and we'll go back to actually reaching the application. The application is telling us that you need to specify a rocket. No clue what that means, but since it was okay with me sending an object, in fact, actually, I could try sending an array and see if it tells me, no, it just says not specified. But let's try specifying a rocket by naming a parameter that's in this payload, essentially, called rocket. And I don't know what rocket's supposed to be. I'll just make it a number and see what it tells me it needs to be. Because maybe I'll keep getting error messages that will shape my request. There's no documentation, right? That was part of the prompt, so I'm discovering the API organically here. And it tells me that, yeah, we see you gave us a number, we want a string. So we'll give it an empty string because I don't know what it's supposed to be. It tells me that it doesn't recognize the empty string rocket, but it does say that there's an available rocket called Triton. So I'm just going to send that and see what it says. Now it's telling me about a new parameter. It's happy with rocket Triton, but now it needs a launch time. And based on the fact that this is camel case, it's probably the actual literal name I want to use. I'm just going to go ahead and add a parameter called launch time. And I'm also going to make it an empty string and hit send. In response to that, I get this hour minute format thing. This needs to be an actual time in that format. So let's figure out what that's going to be. Now, unfortunately, I don't know what launch time I'm supposed to use. Let's just pick now. You can see you probably can't see my clock in the bottom corner there, but it's 5:34 for me, so I'm not up at egregious hour. If I hit send, it says launch time unapproved. So not just any launch time will satisfy this API, unfortunately. So I need to be more specific. Unfortunately, if I just change it, try different values, it's just going to keep telling me it's unapproved. So I need probably to figure out what time it expects. But really all I have as a reference here is this web page, and it doesn't really give me any hints as to what time it might be expecting. But this is a good example of there may be some additional information in the prompt that will help me. And in particular, I want to point out this scheduled for noon line, which, pretty unambiguously around the world is considered 12 o'clock. So we're going to go ahead and try that one and see if that works. When we do that, we get further. Now it's okay with our launch time, but we need to specify some kind of fuel pump ID. Like before, since pump ID is camel case, I'm going to assume that's the name of the field it's looking for. And I'm going to send an empty string like usual. In this case, it tells me it's not happy with the string and it wants a number, so I'll just give it 0. But it says that basically this particular fuel pump 0, is either not active. So there's some conditions that aren't being met with this fuel pump. But this does tell me some interesting things. It says the way this is phrased is kind of like this is its own endpoint somewhere, right? That I might not have used yet. And I can also go back to status and see that there is a fuel endpoint. So rather than try different pumps, although I could do that, I could just send pump ID 1 and it tells me the same thing, and I could try 2 and so on and so forth, and I might not get anywhere with this. But what I do see in the original is that there's a separate endpoint, and I might get more information from that. So let's duplicate this request, and instead of sending to rocket launch, let's set to pump. Or not pump, it's fuel, isn't it? So trying out fuel. And I get a whole array this time of different pumps that are available and their IDs. but it doesn't tell me anything about these conditions like activity and capacity. So I'm gonna try and send the request that it kind of outlined here, where it's like fuel slash the actual ID number. Let's try, um, fuel slash 2 and see what it sends back. And it says the additional information, which is the capacity, or I guess in this case it's labeled remaining, which is not above 50%, and the status, which is active. So I guess we're still stuck trying different IDs, but at least we know there's like only 5 of them, right? So if we try 5, we're gonna get nothing. Basically, this is terminated. So unfortunately, we don't get to use this one because it's not active. But if I try 4, I do see that this pump meets the requirements I needed. It's over 50% and it's active. So I'm going to go ahead and switch back and use pump ID number 4 here and see if that gets me further. And it does. It's now happy with these 3 fields. One thing it's not happy with is that I still need a front-end authorization token. I'm going to keep my trend going and assume that this is another field I need to pass, and I'm just going to call it token and make it a string and see what it says. And it did change the error. Now it says, okay, great. We see the token you're giving us, but it's invalid. It's not supposed to be an empty string. And so, of course, that begs the question, what is it supposed to be? I mean, I can try a bunch of different stuff, but I probably won't get anywhere just guessing. So kind of like the launch time, I need to look around for hints as to what this authorization token might be. And I think the word that they use here, front end, kind of tells me that maybe this token is stored somewhere in the actual code for the front end part of this web app. And so if I go back to the web app itself, and go back to this inspect element thing, maybe somewhere in these scripts that are being loaded, there's a token constant of some kind that would normally be used by this application to communicate and authorize with the backend. Unfortunately, actually, like I showed earlier, going through this code is unpleasant. So instead, I'm going to go through the debugger, which allows me to just do a search on the different resources that have been loaded. And I can browse them as well, but I think it'll be faster if I just search, because I'd be willing to bet that wherever this thing is, it's probably just called token. And if I search for token, I get quite a bit. A lot of this is framework stuff, so we're not actually interested in it. But down here we see, part of the actual, like, one of the next pages that are embedded here. We get a kind of promising result. It says that token is equal to something. So if I click this, it'll take me to where in the code, which is minified, this is. And I think I can beautify this. I don't remember. Yeah, pretty print source. There it is. Oh, nice. This is a little bit more legible. We can see that there is a token here. However, what's interesting is that it's just a random string. It looks like some kind of secret value that I might use for authorization. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy it and take it over to Postman and try using it and see what happens. So when I do that, I accidentally clobbered my clipboard, so it's not going to work. But let's try it one more time. There we go. Hit send, and boom. We launched a rocket. Who knows where to, but it's launched. Our job is finished, and we get a flag. So nice. This is, again, not the flag that you want to turn in for points. So, go through this process yourself. Make sure you understand the steps, get familiar with the tools, and once you get a flag, you can turn in that different flag for different points. Or I guess for credit, I should say, because this challenge is not worth points. But yeah, so that's it for me. Thank you so much for following along, and I hope you learned something, and enjoy the rest of the CTF. I'll see you later.